Okay, cool. So just to sort of give a little bit of an introduction about you, if that's okay. You are the author of Brain Over Binge and the Brain Over Binge Recovery Guide, two incredible books. In your first book, you talk about your personal experience, so your journey with bulimia, why conventional therapy didn't work, and how you recovered for good. And then in your second book, you introduced an effective and personalized way to plan and end your eating disorder. So both your books got a lot of positive feedback and reviews. One saying, and I quote, "I no longer binge. For the first time in my life, I wrote an actual thank you note and mailed it to the author of this book. I've been a chronic serious overeater my entire life. I tried everything, but nothing worked until this." And it's clear to say that you've changed so many people's lives, mine included. And more importantly, their perspective on eating disorders, like looking at it from a more logical side rather than an emotional one.
Mhm.
So thank you so much for being here today and doing this with me.
Yes, I'm
How
excited to talk to you. I'm
Thank
looking forward to this conversation. And yeah,
you.
I appreciate you sharing that review. When I wrote the first book, I didn't know like who would read it, who it would help, and my goal was just to help one person and to continue to get positive feedback. 10 years later is just amazing and means a lot to me.
Yeah, I bet you didn't expect this to happen, right?
I mean, I hope that it would reach people and help people, but I wasn't sure. And I kind of just put it out there and just realized I didn't have much control of it after that. Like it was going to be received the way it was going to be received. And, all I could do was share my own story, share what I learned in hopes that, it could save someone else from going through that same thing. And it's been really successful, and it doesn't help everyone. I'm not sitting here saying it's the cure for everyone who has an eating disorder, but I hope that it at least gives people who read it a piece of information that they can use in their own journey.
For sure, absolutely, 100%. I couldn't agree more. I just wanted to kind of like set the scene and ask you how you would define an eating disorder for some people that may not know about eating disorders and bulimia more specifically, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I mean, eating disorders really just involve severe disturbances in eating. I mean, it's kind of what the word implies. And it's not just like eating a little too much or, maybe skipping a meal because you're too busy. Like these are severe disturbances where the way you're eating is affecting your life. It's affecting your thinking. It's affecting your ability to concentrate, to focus, to accomplish things in your life. So, they can trend toward anorexia, where your disturbance is involving restricting and starving yourself and not eating enough, and really having that obsession with weight loss. And then the other way is bulimia, which I started with anorexia, like a lot of people do who end up bulimic. About 50%, I think, of anorexics eventually become bulimic, or somewhere around that number, because the body does react to that starvation. Like the body and brain try to save you. They try to, really, you lose control, like your survival instincts take over. So bulimia is eating in really an out of control way, like way more food than a normal person would eat in that time period, in that same circumstance. Binge eating disorder is similar, but the difference between binge eating disorder and bulimia is just in whether or not you purge. In bulimia, there's purging, there's self-induced vomiting, laxatives, overexercise, dieting can be used as purging. And in binge eating disorder, there typically is not those purging behaviors.
For sure. What I found interesting in your book is when I went through my personal experience, my all I thought there was to purging was vomiting. And
Mhm.
you expressed in your book that you would excessively exercise. I found that really interesting, obviously, because I don't think a lot of people know that there's different ways of purging. They
Yeah.
simply see it as people that would, make themselves throw up and after binging. So
Yeah.
definitely interesting. Um, so how did yours sort of start? Let's go from there. How did it kickstart?
Yeah, I was about 15 or 16. It was around like right before my third year of high school. I got a tonsillectomy, which is I described in the book. And around that time, my a lot of my friends were dieting. A lot of my friends were, it's just kind of something that culturally it's a cultural issue, like that girls become, and boys too, and anyone becomes like more conscious of their weight, and it's just a kind of a trend to diet, and it was at the time. I mean, this is a long time ago. And when I got my tonsils out, I couldn't eat for a while, and like I mean, I could eat, but like very soft stuff, ice cream, soup, things like that, and I lost weight. And it was just like it just kind of happened that I was like, oh, wow, this is something that other people are trying to do right now. And I've lost weight and I kind of felt successful and I didn't really want to gain the weight back. So then I kind of, instead of going back to eating normally, I started restricting and it seemed like something I just kind of fell into. And I think because of my, like, some of my personality traits, like I tended toward perfectionism and just trying to be the best at everything, and not that, I'm not blaming that for my eating disorder, but I think those are some of the factors that caused me to want to diet and to take it too far. So I just restricted more and more, like throughout my third year of high school into my fourth year of high school, and around like when I was about 17, I binged for the first time, and it was like just a really unsettling experience. I didn't understand what was going on. Like I I say that I didn't understand, but like even leading up to that, I feel like my appetite was increasing. Like I felt like I couldn't maintain the restriction. I felt like all I wanted to do was eat. All I thought about was food. So like even though the actual binge was like, oh my gosh, what's happening? It kind of made sense. Like that's what I felt like I wanted to do for a long time. So in a way, it felt like relief. It felt like, oh my gosh, I'm finally doing what I want to do. And little did I know it was just my body trying to save me, trying to protect me. Over the years, I made it mean a lot more than that. But it started happening more and more because, of course, after I binged, I didn't just go back to eating normally. I kept restricting. I kept restricting my food intake, over exercising, that. So it just became a very, just a self perpetuating habit that went on for about 6 years. And, I feel fortunate that I was able to overcome it. I mean, some people I talk to struggle for 30, 40 years. And it's, I am glad that I was able to put it behind me. And my hope that is that I can help other people do the same.
Absolutely, that's really beautiful. And also, I'm hoping that this video, today, some people will be able to get just a short sort of understanding of, eating disorders and how your brain plays a huge role in it. So you said you realized something wasn't right. Did you realize that you had an eating disorder, or did someone tell you that you had an eating disorder?
Well, no, during the restriction phase, like during that first about a year and a half, I lost a significant amount of weight. I mean, I look like the same person, but I definitely like lost a significant amount of weight. And my parents like really pushed to get me to therapy, and I went to see a therapist, and it wasn't a good experience. And I was really kind of in denial that something was wrong. And I just thought, well, I'm just trying to be a good, like I kind of blamed a lot of it on my desire to be a competitive runner. Like I wrote in the book, I ran in college and for the track team and the cross country team, and I really excelled at that in high school. So the weight loss initially like seemed to help with that. Over the long term, it was not good. I ended up having like 5 or 6 stress fractures. I ended up just, it basically ruined my running career. So don't take me saying that as like, oh, weight loss helps with your athletics. No, it doesn't. But like in the beginning, it was easy for me to say, oh, I'm just trying to be in the best shape possible to run as fast as I can, and that kind of thing. So, I was able to kind of convince my parents I was okay. And really even to convince myself I was okay. It really wasn't until maybe after like several binges. I mean, even after the first one, I was like, oh my gosh. But maybe after, I don't know how many binges, but once it happened several times, I ended up trying to make myself throw up because I was like, I felt so out of control during the binge that I like felt like I had to do something about it. So I remember just being in the bathroom trying to make myself throw up, and I never could, like throughout the course of my eating disorder, which I'm thankful for. But I just remember sitting there like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe that I'm doing this. And at that point, I kind of felt like, okay, something's not right.
For sure, absolutely. You mentioned that you started binging because you were dieting. And
Mhm.
do you think that, how do I put this? Do you think that there's a healthy way of dieting? Because in your book, you also mentioned that dieting most of the time can be the cause to developing an eating disorder
Mhm.
and bulimia, because obviously you're putting yourself in that starvation mode. And, do you think that there is a healthy way of dieting?
It's a good question because I think it kind of depends how you define dieting. Like in the Brain Over Binge Recovery Guide, I define dieting, I don't know if I can quote it exactly, but as like giving your body less food than it physically needs in an attempt to lose weight. Like it's purposefully denying yourself of food that you need. Um, some people could define dieting as like just eating healthier, like not necessarily eating less, not depriving your body of anything, but like just changing some things. If you're drinking sodas all the time. Maybe you start drinking more water. Like, I wouldn't consider that dieting. So when you make nourishing, healthy changes and you make sure that you're still giving yourself enough food, and you're just like doing it in a very self-caring way where it's not all about weight loss and restriction and what, size you can fit into or a number on the scale, like I wouldn't really consider that dieting. So I don't think like quote dieting is ever necessary for weight loss. I'm there's
Yeah,
people who have like health conditions, and I'm not claiming to be a doctor. Take your nutritionist or doctor's advice about things like this. But I don't personally think that a quote diet is necessary or effective for weight loss. We've all seen the statistics of how, dieting has an extreme failure rate. And there's some debate around that, but most people agree it's somewhere around 95% of diets fail. That doesn't mean that you can't make healthy changes. It's just not a diet, because diets just go against our biology. So like, yes, I think people can lose weight in a healthy way, but no, I don't think dieting is effective or necessary to do that.
for sure. Do you think it's maybe because diets fail most of the time because of the social and external factors that influence, the reasons as to why you're dieting? Because, we talk about the extreme dieting and fitness community online on social media that we see, and do you think that people may turn towards negative body image and, developing eating disorders because their goals are not realistic and not healthy, because, they're comparing themselves to other people that may have completely different genetic bodies,
Mm-hmm.
and not dieting for the right reasons? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I think that, seeing this, like when I was just started dieting, it was a long time ago and social media wasn't a thing, like
Yeah.
I don't even know if I want to date myself here, but I don't even know if I had an email account at the time. I don't know. But like
A lot of change.
it just wasn't a thing. There was still magazines and there was still cultural pressure. There was TV, there, movies and things, but there wasn't that social media. And I can see how it is creating so much extra stress and pressure to have this perfect body type, because you see these images every day. I mean, you can scroll anytime, they're at your fingertips, these images of people who are like seemingly doing it perfectly. And anytime you try to achieve a body type that's not like within your genetic natural weight range, it's going to create problems. It's going to be a losing battle. So if you're looking at someone else who has a completely different, like you said, genetic structure and different biology, and you're trying to achieve that same result with your own body, like a lot of times you have to do really unnatural things to try to get there, and it's not worth it, and it can't last. It's not sustainable. So yeah, I mean, totally. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, I think from my personal experience, I stopped following people that I was comparing myself to. And I know it sounds really simple, just go on Instagram and stop on following people that look, like they exercise every day, all day. And because at that time in my life, it was constantly comparing. So I feel like that's something really important if you're scrolling online all day and you're following these
Yeah.
people that are continually making you want to look like them. I'd say just unfollow these people and follow people that are a little bit more in a different sport community, perhaps. I follow a lot of powerlifters. That's a completely different story, but for me that inspires me. And rather than following people that I can't necessarily get to physically, and it's unrealistic, that doesn't mean that these people shouldn't be posting. I just think for any personal experience, at that time you should really follow people that are going to inspire you towards
Yeah, I think that, that applies to really anything. Like anytime you're
any.
scrolling on social media and there's negativity, and not that you can't handle it, but like why focus there if you're trying to recover, if you're trying to turn your focus to other things, if you're trying to get the body obsession and weight obsession out of your life, then it just makes sense to kind of get it out your life in the form of social media and things like that. So I do agree with you that it is helpful to unfollow and to follow people that you resonate with and that make you feel
Sure,
good and that
yeah,
that help you.
absolutely. So just to go back on your journey, what methods did you try to overcome your eating disorder before realizing that they weren't working, or it just, wasn't working for you and you weren't getting any better?
Yeah. When I went to college, I got like a scholarship to run track, and I started, and my coach just kind of was really concerned because I was still, my weight, even though I was binging, my weight still kind of reflected my anorexia, and he had seen like a huge change from when he recruited me like a year earlier to then. And he's just really concerned and sent me to like the sports psychologist on campus. And I just opened up, even though my coach thought I like wasn't eating. The problem was that I like really was out of control, binging all the time and exercising hours and hours and hours to try to make up for it, in addition to the running and like just completely exhausting myself. So I basically told this sports psychologist he sent me to, like, okay, I'm out of control. I can't control my binging. And he sent me to like the campus nutritionist and psychologist. And I kind of went down the path of what was recommended at the time and what still kind of seems to be the standard treatments. And that's basically, it's there's a few different approaches, but it's kind of digging into the reasons for your eating disorder. Like, why are you doing this? What are you coping with? That was like the huge question I was always trying to determine. Like, you're using the theory then, and still to an extent, is that you're using the eating disorder, you're using the eating behaviors to try to cope with something in your life, because you know, are not able to handle stress. So you binge to kind of numb yourself. You're not able to handle your emotions. So you binge to kind of stuff down your feelings. And so it's all about kind of getting in touch with your feelings, curing any underlying issues, like some like high anxiety, tendency toward like depressive symptoms, or, you know, like curing things that in theory would make you feel better and therefore would make you not want to binge. And like, to me, it just didn't work. Like, it, no matter how many problems I overcame, no matter how many childhood issues I talked about, no matter how much I learned how to cope with stress, with different things that supposedly triggered the binges, I just kept having this all-consuming desire to binge that, like, in the moment, no matter what I had talked about in therapy, it just overtook me every time. And I found myself eating in an out of control way and then exercising hours on end to try to make up for it. So, you know, that's kind of the basic theory of what I learned. And it wasn't all from like one therapist. I went to several therapists, and just a lot of information online at the time. And by the time I was in college, there was the internet. So like, in books, I would check out a lot of books on it. And it's not that I think any of that is wrong. Like, my therapists were well-meaning, and I talked about a lot of issues that I think it was really helpful to talk about, but talking about those issues didn't solve this desire to binge, this habit that I had created.
So you feel like therapy kind of taught you how to deal with external issues and
Yeah,
emotions?
it seemed like kind of a roundabout way to cure the issue. And there are, I think it's come a long way in that it is therapy today, I think, is more CBT is typically the recommended treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy. And that is more effective in that it does help you work on the kind of skewed thinking that you have, the distorted thoughts that drive the harmful behavior. And so it kind of is a more behavioral focus. And my treatment at the time was a lot less behavioral focused. So I think that, you know, even having that more behavior driven treatment back then would have helped me. But mine was a lot more just like talk therapy. Let's find out what happened in your past that could have led you here. And, you know, I was just like, I was like 19 when I started therapy. And like, life is like really confusing anyway. And to kind of require that I solve all that happened before in order to solve this issue that had just come up, it just seemed like kind of all unnecessary. And ended up, yeah, not being what helped me in the long run.
I think it's so important that you say that. You know, I'm 21, and when I, you know, had my eating disorder, I was, you know, 19 years old as well. And you already feel like there's so much that you have to deal with life at that
Yeah.
age. You know, you're just leaving your parents. You know, I was off to uni, dealing with things alone, finances, I don't know, emotions and stuff. And on top of that, when you have something that's overwhelming, you know, an eating disorder, and on top of that, you have to heal everything around it. It literally feels impossible.
Yeah.
Which makes it even harder. So I completely, yeah, understand what you're saying in that sense.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how you like you took the initiative, and how you know, the whole brain side, how you discovered, how you basically healed yourself, let's say, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't just me. Like, I give a lot of credit, which in the book and here, to a book called Rational Recovery by Jack Trimpey. And it was something I, you know, after going round and round with therapy for so long, I ended up, I talk about in the book as well, I took a medication, and it kind of like temporarily got rid of my desire to binge. But like every other problem I had in my life was still there. And every problem that I had ever tried to fix, like with therapy, I mean, I fixed some of them, but like everything was the same, except that I did not have a desire to binge. Like I had all the same flaws that a lot of I still have today, you know, and but I wasn't binging, and it was all like really made me question everything. I was like, okay, if I can have my urges to binge kind of go away because of medication, it only lasted like 2 months, and I would never recommend, you know, that, again, not a doctor, do what your doctor, you know, advises as far as medication, but it gave me side effects and it wasn't worth it, like as a long-term cure. And it was not a long-term cure, but it made me realize that, okay, maybe something is just going on in my brain that's creating this desire to binge. And it's not because of my life's problems. It's not because I don't have everything figured out yet. It's not because I need to find purpose in my life and I need to feel fulfilled in order to stop binging. Like maybe it's just like this glitch in my physiology. So, you know, medication stopped working. I started binging again, but I didn't go back to therapy at that point. I was like 24. Sorry, I'm getting I recovered about 16 years ago. So, I went to a bookstore one day and I just picked up the book, Rational Recovery. And he talked about basically how in addictions, Jack Shrimpy in Rational Recovery is mainly talking about alcohol and drug addiction, but I kind of saw a lot of similarities. And he talked about how we have two brains in our head, like our higher brain, which is our human brain that like gives us rational thought, that gives us our identity. And then we have sort of a primitive side. We have this part of our brain that's only interested in temporary pleasure. It's only interested in survival, in rewarding behaviors. And like when addictions occur, this part of our brain and the primitive brain, or what he calls the animal brain or the beast brain, it kind of takes over and we identify with it as ourselves, but it's really not. It's just this ancient primal force. And kind of really all hit home for me. I mean, I know this is all more described in my book. I can just kind of give a brief version here, but it made me realize that, like, okay, all this time, I actually truly in my higher brain did not want to be binging. I felt so like out of control. I felt like some force beyond my control like took over. And this was like my primitive brain. This was the part of my brain that initially was just trying to protect me. It was trying to make up for the restrictive dieting. Like it only makes sense that we have this ancient survival like mechanism within our brain that can take over. And like it was my healthy brain trying to save me, trying to for me not to starve. And once that like and eating that first time, I said earlier that even though it was really unsettling, like something about it actually felt really good because of course, like I was finally getting relief from starvation. So it was like a rewarding experience, even though, you know, the pleasure, if you could call it that, is very temporary, but it becomes an addictive process. It basically, your primitive brain comes to think that you need it to survive. Like, and it comes to react that way. Like every time I wanted to binge and I had those urges to binge, it really truly felt like I needed to binge to survive. And that's how people in drug addictions feel, or people in addicted to alcohol feel. They feel like they have to have this substance. And there's a physiological component too, you know, like it's not just all contained to this one area of the brain, but it helped me to see it as like a lower brain versus my higher brain. And my higher brain wanted to quit. And what this book showed me was that, you know, you basically have to just separate yourself from that voice that's encouraging you to binge. You have to realize that it's not truly you. And like once you stop kind of listening to it, then it's going to fall silent. And that's like exactly what happened. And it surprised me. And it was like not anything like I had learned in therapy, but it worked for me and it's worked for a lot of other people. And again, not for everybody. And that's a short version, but I hope that that made some sense.
No, absolutely. It was in chapter 17 of your book, and it was where you speak about my two brains. And I think it makes everyone that reads the book understand, like I said in, the beginning of this video, you make people understand the more logical side, right? Like
Mhm.
rather than looking at the emotional one. So essentially it's you have these triggers to eat, right? Because you're putting yourself in this diet, this starvation mode. So your brain is sending triggers, correct me if I'm wrong. And then the more you feed into those triggers, the more it's gonna become this unhealthy cycle. And then you get
Mhm.
caught up in it. And the way to get out of it is to recognize that these are just voices and just triggers, correct?
Yeah, just I try to teach people that the one cause of every binge is an urge to binge. Like the urges are the cause. Regardless of kind of what triggers it. Triggers is a term that's used a lot in therapy. Like, okay, did your stress from the day trigger you to binge? Did your, fight with your parent trigger you to binge. But in my approach, it's like, okay, there may be triggers that like set off the habit or set off like the, based on your learning and conditioning and kind of what you've done in the past. Let's say, a negative emotion could trigger an urge. It doesn't mean the negative emotion is the cause. Like without the urge, the negative emotion is just that. Like I have negative emotions all the time. You had them before you developed this eating disorder. Sometimes you have urges after positive emotions. Like it's not, I think there's a big misconception that, negative emotions and bad things, events that happen in your life cause the binges. The binges may become more connected to negative events just because it is that sort of pleasurable, kind of rewarding experience temporarily. So, when we do feel negative, like we tend to want things that are pleasurable, but it's really the urges that kind of come between the trigger and the binge. So if you can learn how to deal with the urges, then you don't have to worry about solving every trigger, like, because you can't. It's basically impossible to like fix everything in your life and make your days go perfectly so that you never like have any negative emotions. And not that therapy really expected that to happen, but I kind of felt like that was the cure. Like I thought I had to make everything go perfectly to avoid a binge. And even when things did go well, sometimes I would still binge, or a lot of times I would still binge. So it was like, it really helps. It helped me, and it helps a lot of people to just think of the urge as the problem. So no matter why it comes up, when it comes up, you can learn to deal with the urge instead of the, supposed underlying causes. Does that make sense?
Absolutely makes sense completely. You said that you recovered 16 years ago, right?
Almost. In May, yes.
Yeah.
In May of '05, I bought Rational Recovery. And then I binged like a couple more times. So like I say I recovered in May, but it was more like midsummer that I had my kind of last binge. So, people read my book and they say, oh, you just stop right away. And yeah, I did, but it's not like the urges went away. I mean, the urges took about 9 months to go away. It just, that consistent, not responding to them, seeing them in a different way. Like once I read that and I kind of understood the brain and practiced this a few times, like I could just feel that those urges were not me. And not everyone has that experience right away. Like some people take a lot more practice, and it's kind of a practice in mindfulness about like feeling your experience, accepting your experience of, the physical symptoms that the urges create, the thought, like the logical thoughts that try to convince you to binge, the feelings that come up, and just kind of allowing that all to be there and not acting on it and seeing it as what I call neurological junk. It's just like this glitch in your brain, and it's on this cycle, and it's just going to keep repeating and repeating until you kind of stop feeding it or stop rewarding it and reinforcing it. That,
Mhm.
as you stop reinforcing it, it does fade away. And it wasn't like I had strong urges for 9 months. They definitely tapered off like within a few weeks and then a few months. And around 9 months is when I just never really thought about it anymore.
Right. I think it's obviously hard because everyone has their different recovery process, and a lot of the time a lot of the time we see people that have recovered, and let's say you took on average 9 months, and a lot of people would think, oh, is it going to take me 9 months? Is it really going to take me that long? But obviously everyone reacts with things differently. But I guess if you look at it like a process, like you say, like recognizing these voices, stepping aside from them, just viewing them, like you say, as neurological junk. And then
Mhm.
slowly your brain basically rewires itself, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Like learning about neuroplasticity was kind of the second step. Like I learned about Jack Trimpey's approach, and then after that, I read a bunch of studies about from Jeffrey Schwartz, who did studies on like OCD patients, and he taught people kind of a similar thing that okay, these voices that kind of tell you to do, like it's your own voice, but it's on repeat. It's like automatic thoughts. You're not controlling them, they're coming automatically. And he taught people basically to be mindful and to realize these thoughts were not them. These are just automatic thoughts in your brain that are meaningless, and they're powerless, and they're harmless. And I think that like not being intimidated by those urge thoughts anymore, not feeling like they meant something. Like I think that was a huge thing, feeling like in therapy, I always thought the urge meant something. Like it meant I truly needed emotional fulfillment, or like if I was lonely and I had an urge, okay, I needed some sort of companionship or whatever. Like I thought they really meant a lot. But the problem was when I tried to do those things, like if I was lonely and I called a friend, like it literally did nothing to turn off the urge. Sometimes it just made it worse. So like, if that works for you, then great. Like don't stop doing that. If
Yeah, for
you know
sure.
doing something else when the urge is arising, if that helps, that's wonderful. But I think that just seeing the urge as just completely meaningless, like don't even need to give it a second thought, don't need to pay any attention to it, it doesn't hold some sort of symbolic value in my life. I think that was super helpful in just like letting the urge be there. It's like, okay, this is just what my brain is doing.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean something's wrong with me. And it's just going to go away, and just move on with your day and move on with your life.
For sure. I think also, one thing, and I think you mentioned it, is replacing the urge with something else than
Mm-hmm.
binging, like an activity or just doing something. If you have this urge to binge, you just get up. And obviously, this is super hard to do because
Yeah.
at times you feel, the voices, let's call them, they just get the voices, they get so intense. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
literally your body is like everything in your body is pushing you to binge. So it's
Yeah.
really difficult to be like, oh, I'm going to get up and go work out. But
Yeah.
the first few times is the hardest sort of push. But then
Yeah.
after you get there, it kind of, would you say it gets easier?
Yeah, I think so. And also just not even pressuring yourself to have to do something. Like you don't have to do anything. If you don't get up and work out, if you just stay on the couch and, like
Yeah.
that, no matter what you do, like you can still not act on the urges. Like it's great to do something else. I think that's great. And sometimes it helps you pass the time. It helps you just kind of create that space between you and the urge. It kind of gives you a sense of your own power because you're like, wow, I'm having all these kind of this desire and this urge right now, but I'm doing something else. And it just really shows that you can control your actions because ultimately you can. Like these urges are automatic. The primitive brain can like send desires and send thoughts, and you don't have to act on them. And all of us experience this like every day in our life. Like our brain can throw some crazy thoughts out there and we just like don't pay attention, but somehow the urges become very meaningful, and you can kind of learn to see them as just other types of like thoughts and desires that you never would want to follow.
Of course. Essentially, it's just not paying attention to those urges.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and one thing I'd like to just kind of say here is that like this only works if you're eating enough. Like if you're still in that
Yeah.
like restriction, dieting is like it's you I mean, you can maybe ignore a couple urges, but it's gonna eventually get the better of. Like you have to be in a state where you're like, okay, I'm nourished, my body is safe. Like it's teaching your body that it's safe. It's teaching your brain that you're not going to starve it again. So that's a huge part of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not feeding into, because obviously the more you diet, the more that you're just getting into that cycle.
Yeah,
So,
totally.
even obviously no one wants to binge on healthy foods. No one wants to binge on, I don't know, broccoli or whatever, but you want to obviously replace those foods and just buy healthier foods in general. I wouldn't buy any foods in my own house that would make me want to binge. I'd buy just healthy foods, no processed foods, so that I knew that if I did get those urges, I wouldn't have anything to really binge on. So I don't know if, like, would you do that as well when you were going through it, or was it
Um,
because you were living with your parents at the time?
Not quite at the time. I was already living because I went to college and I moved back to my parents, and then I moved in with the man who eventually became my husband. So I was living with him at the time. And yeah, he bought all kind of junk food. I don't know. I felt like I wasn't in a place where I could tell him, don't. I don't know. It's probably complicated, but like, no, I personally didn't do that, but I know people who do, and it works for some people, and it's not that it like quote works, like you have to do it, but it just helps create that space that I kind of mentioned before. Like if you have an urge and you don't have that opportunity to do it right away, like, yeah, you could go buy food, but like if you don't have it right there, you kind of are forced to hear these thoughts in your head and experience these urges. And the more you can get used to experiencing the urges without acting, like the easier it's going to be. So if removing kind of that temptation helps you, then that's great. But just know that also you don't have to, because I think eventually, and maybe you've experienced this, is to get to the point where like you don't feel like foods are a threat, and you feel like you can be around foods, like any type of food, without it sending you in the wrong direction. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That was actually the sort of question that I was going to ask. Someone asked from the general public, do you think that not buying off like our trigger foods, let's say, is deepening our negative relationship with those foods as a result? Do you see
Oh
what I
yeah.
mean?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, because a lot of times restriction comes with like a lot of forbidden foods and I can't eat that, and a lot of fears around food and things. So yeah, like totally understand not wanting to perpetuate that, but just know that you're on your own journey, and like there's no need like to reintroduce a certain food right now if you don't feel comfortable with it. I would just kind of trust yourself. And if there are certain foods that you really just feel like you don't want to introduce until you feel more confident, don't think that it's like perpetuating anything. Just think that this is just what you need right now. But it that being said, I do think it's important to challenge yourself over time. Like, okay, some people have talked about having a kind of a list of foods that go from like the ones they feel safest around to the ones that feel like they're most risky. So start with the foods that you do feel more safe, and then challenge yourself to kind of move up. And some foods you just may never want in your life. Like there are certain foods that I binged on that I just never really had a desire to have around again.
Yeah,
And it's not that I forced myself not to. It's just that it's like they just kind of lost their appeal. It's just a different process for everyone. But I don't think you need to overthink it or judge yourself. Like you definitely want to get a lot of this self-judgment like out of it. And I think a lot of times people think there's this right way, and you have to eat perfectly intuitively, and you have to, allow yourself to eat whatever you want whenever you want. And like that's not necessarily the case. And just kind of trust that you'll find a way of eating that works for you. And it may involve, not having certain foods in the house. And that's okay. Like even normal eaters do that sometimes because they may tend to just eat too much of them. And it's not that big of a deal, I don't think.
for sure. And also, even, a lot of the time, I think when we go through, again, an eating disorder, we can't imagine a world where one day we'd be able to eat the foods that would make us binge normally.
Hmm.
And I say
Yeah.
normally because today, I find myself, I love to eat, I don't know,
Hmm.
cake from time to time, or like a
Hmm.
snack,
Yeah.
on occasion, but I don't feel that need to binge. And I never ever would have thought back then, you can't eat that
Yeah.
and then put it away. You're going to eat the whole
Yeah.
thing. And I think that people really need to understand that they can actually have a healthy relationship with food in general.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. I have had that same experience of like, yeah, it goes away. And I think a lot of it is when you nourish yourself and when you're not restricting anymore. Because before I started restricting, I could pretty much eat whatever and not get out of control. And once I started restricting, that's really what started that kind of healthy relationship. And with once I started restricting, it's when it started the unhealthy relationship with certain foods. And every some people say, well, I've never been able to eat a food in a normal way, and everyone is different. And there are certain people who have a higher attraction to sugar and their body reacts more, to processed foods than someone else. And so yeah, like those people may need to always kind of know it's not really a limitation, but just know their own body and their own physiology and work with that, and don't judge yourself for it. So even if you don't have that experience, and even if some of these foods do keep a higher appeal, like that doesn't mean something's wrong with you. It just means like maybe that's just in your genetics, or maybe it's something that you could work on. Like binging is never the solution, but maybe it's like something hormonal, or you're having abnormal cravings because of vitamin deficiencies. Or again, I'm not a doctor or anything, but it's not always that like you don't have willpower. It's like could be something like biologically going on. So like if that's not your experience, what we're talking about, then I think it's okay, and you can either, like I said, work on it, or just realize this may just be kind of part of who you are, and you can learn to cope with that.
For sure. I think it's good that you said, understanding that your body is your body, and listening to your body. If I think when you go through, just like you, when you're in your like recovering and stuff, you try different things to recover. You try different things,
Mhm.
therapy, medicine. And I think that everyone reacts very differently. Who knows? Maybe conventional therapy may work for certain people, like you
Yeah.
said, but it's just sort of trying different things. There is no one way, right? So
Yeah.
everyone reacts differently, and I think that's the most important thing, is understanding that your body's different, and you will react
Mhm.
differently to certain foods, and you will
Yeah.
need different nutrients as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that, some people can stop binging. Like it almost seems like sometimes stopping binging is the more straightforward, simple part. And then some people who are really have the restriction was really strong, and the avoidance of certain foods, it can take longer then to kind of feel really comfortable in how you're eating and feel like it's not kind of a daily struggle. So like, just trust that even if you can stop binging, like, focus on that success. Like, that's wonderful. It's amazing that you can stop binging, but that might not be the end of your journey. Like, you may still have this strong desire to restrict. You may have to really work on that and try different ways of eating and just kind of see what works for you. So that part of it, I find, can sometimes extend beyond stopping the binging itself.
For sure. I think that's so important, to have goals that are step by step and not just like one huge goal that you want to achieve straight
Hmm.
away. I feel like nowadays we want things really fast, and a
Hmm.
lot of the time we diet, from the surroundings and my age and the people that I see. Most of the time I see people dieting because they want to look like someone else or get an ideal body type, but by developing this unhealthy habit with food, you're not going to get to that goal in a healthy way. And, the main
Hmm.
focus essentially is just completely stopping those binges, and then get excited. Like you say a lot, like get excited, because it is so exciting, because you feel like you've actually
Hmm.
achieved something. You actually have control. And after that, once you've killed those binges, let's say, you can focus on eating healthy, getting to know your food,
Hmm.
understanding what you need, and then getting into, I don't know, what sort of exercise or sports you want to do. Um,
Hmm.
your goals change completely. When I was going through it, I wanted to look like, I don't know, this, very typical skinny girl, whatever. And I completely changed my whole perspective on it. And I started powerlifting. And now I want to gain weight and not lose weight. And I
Yeah.
say this because I think it's important. Again, not everyone's route is to go into powerlifting. I think that it's just, it goes to show that as a result, my whole beauty standard has completely changed. And it can change for a lot of people. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, totally. I'm kind of like some, like I talk about in the book, and even seeing me, like I'm tend toward a smaller body type. And now I feel like at the time when I started dieting, that was like the standard, like people kind of wanted to be like skinny. And I feel like today it's more like people want to have these perfect, like curvy physiques and like really muscular. And like, I don't know, I struggle with it because part of me thinks that's like an improvement as far as like not wanting people to like starve themselves, but in a way, like that would not be realistic for me. Like I could never become this perfect curvy
Sure.
person. So like I think any way you're trying to manipulate your body to fit like some sort of cultural standard that's not realistic for you personally, it just can lead to, unhealthy results.
For sure. Going back on what we said, your body is you're not always gonna get the same body as someone else. And I think it's
Hmm.
when you get to that point where you actually accept that, and it
Hmm.
does get easier, when you get to that point where you accept that, you stop setting, unrealistic goals, let's say,
Yeah.
which is obviously healthier. Um, my last question, because we've got like 3 minutes left. um, would you say, so you told me that you decided to share your message. You didn't expect all of this to happen, right? You didn't expect people to contact you and wanting, like myself, to do interviews.
No.
And today, yeah, and you're still doing it today. So today, what's the sort of, plan and stuff? You're doing podcasts at the moment as well? Are you
I
still?
am. Yes, I'm doing podcasts. I think I'm up to episode 80 right now. I just kind of kept going after I wrote the first book. I just kept going, and I wrote the second book, The Brain Over Binge Recovery Guide. And then I started the podcast. I started one-on-one coaching. I started a course. Now my course is like it's a subscription based model. It's only like $10.99 a month. And I hope it's okay if I mention that. I did that because I really wanted to make it accessible to kind of anyone. And I feel like the course is kind of a culmination of everything I've learned over the past 10 years. But I am planning to write a second edition of Brain Over Binge because again, it was 10 years ago. I have learned a lot. I don't want to change my basic message at all, but everyone learns things and evolves. And I do working on that now. I'm hoping to have the second edition out like by the end of the year, maybe. I don't know. I don't want to promise anything. But that's kind of the plan, is just to keep going. I just kind of find something else or different ways to help people. And I have 4 kids, and that's like a huge part of my life. And I don't have as much time for this work as I would otherwise. So yeah, I just do what I can, and I just want to continue helping people in any way that I can.
Yeah, you're definitely an inspiration, honestly. And
Thank
the whole part of, we all go through challenges in life. we don't have to share our message, but when we do, and we see the fact that it can impact people and that people can relate to us when we didn't think, you know, we think we're the only ones going through this, it really is powerful and it means a lot, you know. So yeah, thank you so much for today. And obviously, again, playing a huge part in my recovery. Yeah, I'm really grateful.
Well, good. And you're doing amazing things to help people. And it's great to see like young people out there wanting to help people as well. So
For sure. Thank you so much. Right. Well, that's it. We've done it all. Yeah, we got
okay.
it.
Awesome.